done though.
Okay. All right, so let's, do me a favor, have as much as the candy as that you can. I'm serious, I don't want to take any back with me if you can, so stuff your pockets on the way out or something.
Okay, we grabbed it right away.
And you should still have to share them. Yeah, I was just talking to Kathy, my wife, and she said, including the ones that came while she was on the phone with me just now, that was 50 kids. Last year, we probably had 5. So I don't know what the heck is going on. You can never judge this. I mean, literally, it was 5. There were like 5 little kids and one pat and one bunch, and that was it. And then the rest of the night, I ate candy. So anyway, okay. So now we'll take a complete left turn out of deep Java land and start talking about more from a user's point of view, how you should be building your applications. So. First question that we want to ask is, this is a more general question. This is any kind of a product. I don't care if you're building watches or computers or cars or whatever. What does it mean for a product to be usable? Okay, there are lots of different ways of describing it. Here is one way. This is actually from an ISO standard, or if you like standards. The extent to which a product can be used by specified users. Now what that implies, of course, is you know who your users are, okay? And you have to have some concept of what it means to be used by those users. So you have to answer, what I'm going to show you with this is you have to answer a whole bunch of questions ultimately to understand if whatever you're building is usable. In our case, it's our interfaces for our web applications. So who are your users? That's number one. To achieve specified goals. So now that you have an idea who your target users are, you have to have some idea what it is they want to do, okay? And what will make them happy. And there are all different kinds of goals that, if you're interested in this, by the way, come my next semester, my human-computer interface class, and you will learn all about how you figure this out. Because we'll do the same idea, except without a lot of the technology underneath. But how do you design products, interactive products? So you have to have some idea of what those target users actually want out of whatever it is you're building, and what makes them happy. So there are lots of different ways of answering what a goal is. Some of them are very specific goals. I need my bank statement from last month versus I want it to make me feel happy. those are all, but they're all legitimate, okay? Because if you're getting the bank statement and your users aren't happy, they'll go to some other bank. So there are many different ways of answering this, but there are questions that you have to ask. It has to be effective. And what does that mean? Effective means that it can do what it is that it's supposed to do. And how well does it do it? Efficient. That's the how well does it do it. Okay, so obviously you can have something that's effective but not very efficient, and that could mean lots of different things. But from the user's point of view, it could be effective. In other words, I can get the bank statement, but it takes me 32 clicks to get to it. All right, so it's effective in a sense, but not very efficient. And satisfaction. That kind of takes into account a lot of the fuzzier, what you call UX goals. You ever heard that term? You come across that? User experience. Yeah. That's a lot of those things are what feed into satisfaction. How happy are they with it? And even though that sounds kind of fuzzy, it really isn't, not when it comes down to it. And lastly, in a specified context of use. So in our case, one of those contexts could be using it on a laptop, using it on a tablet, using it on a phone. Each of those could be very different based upon the context. Okay, so you wind up, how usable is it? It could be extremely usable in the on the laptop or desktop, but completely, unusable on a phone. Okay, so all of these things feed into usability. So if you want it in one sentence, it's something like this: a measure of the quality of the interaction between the person and the system. And the system can be anything. It could be a web app like us, or it could be a watch, it could be a door. And there are many different things. It could be a stove, it could be many different things that can be constituted as a system. Anything that has an interface to it. So here's one of the two most famous, there are lots of different famous people in this field, but Jakob Nielsen and Donald Norman are the two probably most famous in this area. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to ask you to read a couple of articles. I mean, they're only like 2 pages long each, but they're chock full of very specific things for developing web apps. So he has several usability concepts. Effectiveness, okay, that's what I was just saying. How good is it at what it is supposed to do? Does it do it quickly with the least overhead? Utility, the user can do whatever they want or need to do. See how this fits back into the other definition. Learnability, it's easy to understand and intuitive, no training or minimal training, and it's memorable. How easy it is to use after you've used it, okay? So those 5 things, there are actually more in these lists, but these are probably the 5 most important ones. So, how does this apply to not building watches, but building web apps? Have you personally ever gotten lost on a website? Okay. Have you left a site without finding what you were looking for? Have you waited too long for the page to download? Have you gone to a site that you can't actually see or read? That's one of my favorite things nowadays. Now, of course, my eyes aren't necessarily as good as they were, but they're no really worse than they've been since the 8th grade. So, but some people have gotten into this, the background and the foreground being almost the same color, making it completely unviewable. Okay. Matter of fact, I had to load a Chrome plugin that increases the contrast so I could see what the heck it was I was looking at. Something's obviously not right there. It's not just my eyes either. Visited a site with outdated information. Okay? All of these and many other frustrations can result in poor usability. Okay? So, I mean, it's just a few things, but I could go on and on for other examples. So, have you ever been confused, lost, unsure, unclear, perplexed, bewildered? I hate to say this, but this is sometimes called the WTF expression. Well, I won't describe for you what that means, but what the fudge? This is, oh my God, it happened again. So it turns out people who do this for a living do research and analysis. Shows that people can't find the information they're looking for 60% of the time. So just for that reason alone, and that's only one of the problems, Or you can't see it as whatever it is you're looking at. Again, that's probably my favorite. So what is the implications of this for you? Who's spending all of your time, days and nights, building this greatest ever website, trying to build the next Google or Facebook or whatever, you're wasting your time for your users when you don't do it correctly. You make them less productive. You frustrate them. They leave your site prematurely without ever doing what it is they were looking to do. They never come back. So what that means is loss of usage equals money when it comes down to it, in whatever shape. Or if you're doing this not as a non-for-profit or an academic, you still wind up losing something in the process. Your dignity, believability, your next job, whatever. But ultimately, you pay for it if you don't do it right. So what makes this somewhat different than some other products or some other software? A lot of dynamic content. I mean, the web was originally founded based upon a lot of static content. That was the idea. But that's not what you see nowadays. You know, things are constantly changing. The pages, even on a single page application, the page itself may look basically the same, but the content is constantly rotating and changing. Broad anonymous audience. Okay, it used to be if you wrote a system and you sent it out to your users, you knew who they were. Nowadays, you have no clue many times, which means they could be bad guys. So there's less privacy. People can be, you know, watching what you're doing or your users. Just less security in general, unless you're very careful. It's ostensibly platform independent. However, the web device, well, the devices nowadays especially, this didn't used to be true when everybody's machine was basically, you know, the same size screen. But now this is very different. And even the browsers are incompatible sometimes. And that's something you have to plan for. People have different expectations about websites and web applications. You know, how available are they? You know, we remember back in the first class or something, we talked about some of those differences. 24/7, the network has to be there, etc. That's again different. Some learning is expected with a standard application. If you, goodness knows, you know, you have classes in Excel, classes in Word, you know, that sort of thing. How many classes do you expect to find in using Facebook or Google or something like that? None. It's essentially the idea is that they should be self-explanatory. It should be so simple to use that it's intuitive. Another thing that's different is there can be more than one entry point, so you have to be careful of that sort of thing too. They can come into your, you know, particularly if they use bookmarks, they can jump into the middle of the application. You have to plan for that. All right, so you have to make sure that even though it made sense for them to be able to get to this point if they came in and logged in and if they just jump in there, you better make sure that you're checking that they're still authenticated and everything else. So, I mean, that's not something that you see in Word or some other application. So, here's another thing from Jakob. People, these are web users themselves. Okay, so what is special about them? Again, they have a very low tolerance for things that don't work. This is essentially what it comes down to. They don't want to have to learn how to use it, all right? And so they have to have an immediate intuition about how to use this. Otherwise, you're going to lose them almost, you know, within the first 2 minutes. And then they may never come back, and there goes your, you know, your business. What else? So they have a very short attention span. They're very impatient. They usually already, I mean, it depends on what your site is for. But particularly if they've been there before, they often have a very specific thing they're looking for, and you want to make it as simple as possible for them to get there. Again, they don't want to learn. This is important. People, in general, do not read whole pages of screens. They scan them. And I'll show you a little bit about how the eye movement works so you get an idea of why that's important. 20%, this is just a general rule of thumb, 20% of all of your content gets 80% of the page views. So you have to make sure that getting to the 20% is very easy. Okay? It's as fast as possible, fewest clicks as possible. And a typical visit, if you look at all different kinds of websites all over the place doing all different kinds of things, a typical visit is just 4 or 5 mouse clicks, in other words, page views. So some of the other behaviors that web users have. As I said, they don't always start at your home page, so that could be an issue. They may only turn out to be interested in a small part of your site. How do you know which part? And how do you design so that they can get there fast? As I said, they scan very quickly before deciding to read what it is you've put there. And this is a physical thing. users have a harder time reading text online versus printed text. That's just true. Okay? So you have your work set for you. So they do care about their time. They don't want to spend the unnecessary effort. They do easily get lost. They do appreciate the aesthetics of your application's user interface. That can be hard to quantify exactly, what makes one look nicer than another, but there is a sense of that. They don't all have the same platform, so that's something you've got to take into account. But a lot of what all of this boils down to is you have to get to know your target users. That has to be number one, clear in your mind. I'm going for people 60 and above. I'm going for teenagers, 11 to 17. I'm going for little kids from 5 to 10. You have to know that. And then and there are lots of things that you can do to find out what it is they really want or need, or how well they can use what you're trying to do. Again, that's the other class. And then you design, using that information, around their goals, not yours. If I can teach you anything about this whole topic, it's so easy to build something you think is the sexiest, coolest thing in the world, and it ain't going to be used by anybody. Okay? I don't care if it makes you feel great about yourself and say, "Oh, this is the hottest technology." It doesn't mean anything. Yeah, what did you prove? Okay, you proved something to yourself and your buddies maybe. But if you want it to be used, you have to know what your users want. Okay? So if you remember nothing else, remember that. So knowing your users, just a simple example. Here is the website from the US Mint. Okay? People who print the money and make the coins. So here, if you look at this, this is not the whole page. I'll show you the rest of it. But it's not the best design page either, but it's pretty straightforward. There's, essentially, it's very easy to see. If you're interested in Sacagawea coins, you can see one there, learn more. The quarters of the states, learn more. A lot of the common things somebody who's interested in coins might be looking for. A calendar of upcoming things, pretty straightforward. Just a few large icons referring to things people might be interested in. It's timely. I just did this yesterday or the day before. So here's Halloween, stuff like that. I do have some problems with the design. And one thing is I find the text to be too small. But now here is, and I'll go over this idea again, below the fold idea. We'll come back to that. This is actually what's on the rest of the page, down at the bottom. Now, of course, that idea depends exactly how much you can see, depends upon the device, the resolution, the size of your fonts, and everything else. But there is a concept of you can't see everything. So that's something you should think about when you're designing your interface. Okay, so now down here, which is below, which would mean I have to scroll up in this case, even with a full big screen, is, see, that's the bottom of the first page. But there's a lot of stuff down here, which is more, if I want to, sign up for emails, or here's the kind of general, table of contents of the other kinds of stuff that I might be looking for, and then they have it broken into, shop, customer service, so there's some nice hierarchy. They should actually make these things bigger or stand out more, but it actually has some of the features of good design, even though it's not perfect. So, who are the users, do you think, that they're targeting?
People want to buy coins.
Yeah, not me, coin numismatists. I like that word. Coin collectors. So are people who are just interested maybe in some of the history of coins, or but a lot of it, I think, has to do, at least here, has to do with coin collecting and such. Okay, but how old do you think they are?
Generally older, I would say, probably 50 and older, probably. for the most
But
part.
they're adults
They're adults,
Yeah.
probably older adults for the most part. That's who you
who are
generally
into
find
coin. Yeah, I would say.
Yeah.
Because most younger people probably wouldn't be
Probably
into
don't
coin
do it.
collecting unless they were raised with it or something. Okay.
It's a little bit of an older hobby, but I'm sure there's still people, you know, that probably use a little older, I would say.
Yeah. So those are the kinds of things that you have to think about, which in my case is one of the reasons I say that the fonts are too small. But okay. Now, of course, we're guessing, but I'm assuming that it's probably something like that. Now, that is that. This is the US Mint. They have a kids page. Okay? Kids page looks like that. That is the entire thing. There's no below the fold, there's no nothing. Okay? That's it. How is it different?
The way the
Colors?
A lot less content.
I'm sorry?
A lot less content.
A lot less content?
Easy,
The
they can
font.
understand what they want.
I'm sorry?
Like they have like games and everything like that over there.
Well, obviously, the topics would be probably more child-friendly. Different logos.
Nice logo.
You tell me, what is that? I found out what that is. You know what it looks like to me?
It looks like a rat.
It looks like a rat.
It looks like a rat, but it's not.
Yeah, no. In fact, I did some exploration because I couldn't believe it was a rat. I'll show you in a second who he is. But before we leave this, so basically, you see, you get the thrust of what I'm saying. Here, it's obviously geared towards a different user base. Okay? This is usable by adults too, but obviously they're probably not going to be interested in the cartoons and the games, etc. Okay, so you have to know your users. A lot of this would turn out to be the same, take you to almost the same places, but very different interface. Okay. By the way, that's Flip. He's a seal, though he still looks like a rat to me. I'm sorry. The seal, you know, the seal of the United States. I think that's what the, yeah. I mean, that looks like a pig or a buffalo or even a lady fish, I guess. Always has lipstick, you know, to eyelid. I had to look to know because he looked like a rat to me. I'm
It
sorry.
did, yeah.
Anyway, so if you're interested in such things, there is in your PDF file, click on this, it will take you, this also happens to be a Norman Nielsen group article. They haven't written every article on user interfaces, but a lot of interesting ones. Children's websites, usability issues. Okay? But obviously, there's a difference. There are different users, different targets, different goals. So, what do you have to account for? Just off the top of my head, age. Gender, okay? If you're going particularly for women versus men, there are things that might appeal to women that don't appeal to men and vice versa. Native language, obviously. I mean, the web is basically, well, has been basically English, but that's not so true anymore. If you look at the sheer number of internet users, then the bulk of them are more Chinese and Indian than they are English speakers, or native English speakers. The educational level, you know, it depends. You know, you have to have an idea if you're going to be targeting, you know, more esoteric, you know, thoughtful stuff, and you're targeting it for a group of, you know, people who are maybe only high school educated or less or something like that. Of course, it's not going. There's a mismatch there. Computer proficiency. You know, you may have the greatest thing in the world for somebody who's 72 years old, but you know they can't use a phone. You know, they're just, this is just not what they learned. Okay. Obviously, the type of computer, the network, browser, all those things come into play. You know, it's going to be, if you're designing something that's really for smartphones, that's where you're going to put most of your energy. You know, etc. Visual and auditory capabilities. This is something a lot of people don't pay much attention to because they don't appreciate that, in fact, there are a lot more disabled people, and using that term in many different ways than they realize. Okay? So I'm going to talk about this for a second because this never gets talked about. The percentage of people with disabilities, and I'll mention what I'm referring to, in many populations is between 10 and 20%. That's a lot of people in a population. Not all of those disabilities affect, what you might have in a web application, but many of them do. Like if you can't walk or have a heart condition, that probably has no real bearing on this, but there are many other kinds. For example, vision, colorblindness. That's probably one of the most, obvious ones, outside of simply not being able to see, except very at all or very large text. Hearing. If your site is depending upon auditory feedback or something, you've just cut out a whole bunch of users unless you design for it. There are ways of designing to support these kinds of things in a site. Mobility impairments, that might actually have an impact. Obviously, cognitive impairments, seizure disorders, these are things that are much more serious. And maybe your users simply, you wouldn't expect them to be in this group. But maybe if you're doing a site to support cerebral palsy or something like that, research, you might have people with cerebral palsy trying to use your site, right? So that's the kind of thing you have to think about. So let's take an easy one. Color normal. Can everybody, I don't want to embarrass anybody, but 10% of men and about 1%, it's much smaller, of women have some color blindness issues. So I think I can see all of these: orange, red, bluish, purple, green, different green, brown. Okay. Does everybody, I think, can probably see that? No. But this is what some people see. There are different kinds of color blindness. This is what some other people see with a different kind of color blindness. This is what some people who have monochromacy see. No colors. There are people who only see in grayscale.
Yeah.
So, what are the repercussions of this? Well, for a website, it makes it maybe unusable for those people or confusing. Out in the real world, if this is what you see, that's well understood. Even if these things are in a different order, you'd still understand them because of the conventions we have for the colors. However, this is what somebody with a particular kind of dichromatic, who can only see two colors, that's what they would see. What do they do? So the reason I put this up is just to make it clear that there are implications of not taking these things into account. So at least think about it. I'm not saying that you have to overdo it, but give the people who might use your systems the benefit of the doubt. There are accessibility guidelines that you can check. These particular ones are international. They're based upon these 4 principles. Perceivable, has to be easy to perceive. Operable, you can actually do something. And it doesn't mean that you have to be able to mouse click, but there may be some other mechanism that you can use to interact. It's understandable. It has to be comprehensible to everybody, and it has to be robust. So it should be able to handle many different kinds of situations. So there are even websites, if you want to test your site against some of these standards, you can run them through these kinds of checkers. Okay, kind of like the syntax checkers from the W3C. All right, but this is for accessibility issues. Okay. Just wanted to mention that in passing because unfortunately people don't usually think about those things, and you should. Okay, back to the general problem. This user-centric design is often forgotten or never known by people who are designing interfaces. As I said, design in many cases often consists of showing off. Which is cool to your friends, but may not make you any money or make your website thrive. Oftentimes the content is disorganized and poorly structured. And when I say semantically, means that you can't tell what's related to what from a meaning point of view. Slow. There are lots of things that you can do to unfortunately make your site slower than it has to be. And there are ways of doing it properly so that you avoid a lot of that. As I said, this is another version of that. Some people treat their designs as a brochure for their talents, which is, if you're let me put it this way. If you're designing a website for your web design company, then maybe this makes sense. But generally, because there your users are looking for it. However, in general, that's not what you're trying to do. You have to, again, go back to what I said. Focus on the users. What do they want? What are they looking to do? What makes them happy? Not you. Oftentimes, it's just too much stuff. The layout, the physical layout is poor. And I'll show you, obviously I'm not going to have enough time tonight to get into this, but I can pick it up next time. Sometimes, as I said, they're unreadable for various reasons. This is a whole other topic of, many sites are advertisement driven. Sometimes that can be just so annoying as to drive people away. This is another annoying one, when they're not maintained or updated. It's very annoying, even if the site looked like it was useful. If you go back and nothing ever changes or it's not updated and it just looks like it's gone dead. Anyway. And just a general lack of consistency, can be very frustrating, because people. Goes back to the idea of being intuitive and requiring minimal learning and minimal memorizing. How memorable is it? Is if it's inconsistent, it makes it much harder to learn. It makes it much harder to remember how to do things. That's bad. Okay. What else? So the result is the product doesn't match the job or the user's desire. Again, if you take the other class, you'll learn about mental models. There's a way a person will interact with a product, whether it's an alarm clock or a toaster or whatever it is. Because what they're doing is they're building mental models of how they understand it should work by what you as the designer show them. Okay? What you give them, how you give them, the mechanisms you give them to interact with it. There are terms for those things called things like affordances. Like, if you, go into that, we take the other class. There's a lot of interesting stuff here underneath all of this. This unexpected occurrence, when it's not desired. Usually people don't like being surprised. All right, so you don't want to usually do that unless it's for a particular effect. Again, has to be usable without training. There's another one, poor feedback, when errors occur. There are lots of things that have to do with designing to avoid errors, and then designing to provide feedback when there are errors, and designing to help them get back to where they want to be. Right? That's very important. And here's another important idea. Your application demands what's called recall rather than recognition. In other words, recall means that they have to remember something that they may have seen before. Versus recognition, this is the difference here. Here's a simple example. You give them a box that says state or province. They have to know what the abbreviation is, et cetera. Are they using abbreviations versus giving them a list to pick from? Okay? This is usually, not always, but usually this is preferable over this. If this list is hundreds of things long, that isn't necessarily a good thing either. But generally speaking, recognition over recall. That's another thing you'll learn if you get into this. Actually, I'm going to have you read this. So there are a couple of things. Mostly what I'm asking you to do, by the way, for the next week is just get ready for next week. and keep going with the project, okay? Just keep chugging away. But I did want you to read a few things, very short, but really chock full of these little nuggets. And as I said in the reading, if you can extract some of these nuggets and show me in your project when it's done where you use them, that's a point in your favor for the grade. Okay, so one or two more things. So from a web app point of view, page design, the layout, the content structure, all of that is obviously the most immediate part. You could have the greatest back-end, server-side, JavaScripting stuff in the world, but it could be totally unusable, okay, because you don't present it properly. So what he's saying is essentially this, is that it has a very large effect on how your site is used. So if you do it properly, for example, in this case, just the layout, how you structure the content, how you display it, is really one of the most critical things to make them usable. So let me just broach this idea, and then we'll stop. So one of the things that makes the physical layout more amenable to users has to do with knowing something about how people see. So this is talking about eye flow. In other words, you have a piece of text, if it's on a screen or a small screen or whatever, the eye has a tendency to flow in particular ways. The more eye movement that's required in the field of what you're looking at, the less information that can be received and processed. That's just physiology says that. So there's a direct relationship between how your eye flows across the design of your pages and the ability to easily process that. Okay? That's just physiology. You can see that. So this would be the natural flow from what's called the and now this, by the way, would be in languages that are left to right. Okay, if you're talking about Arabic or something like, or Chinese or some other languages that read differently, or Hebrew, obviously this would be flipped around. But left to right, like English, you're going to have a tendency to go to the upper left-hand corner and then move down towards the other corner. The implication of that is the eye will have a tendency to resist going to the other places. Right? So, what does that mean? What that means in this case is that, and this actually happens to be more true for online stuff than print stuff. So it's much harder to read online, and people just scan. And there's some more implications of that. The attention span is generally very short, as I said, and the basic idea is you want to work with their tendencies, not against them. So what this means in that particular case, now that you understand a little piece of that physiology, and there's a lot more of things like that you really should understand as an interface designer, is in the case of the upper left, lower right bias. You don't want to put things that are important in the top right or the bottom left, because tendency is not going to be to look there. Okay? So very simple, but what you're doing is you're playing towards people's natural capabilities, because you could miss them. Conversely, if you put things that are eye-catching in the wrong place that really are not important, then you're taking them away from the things you want them to focus on. So again, another way of looking at that. How do you reduce this? Well, I'll talk more about this next time, but there's this concept, maybe I can go on just a little more to show you, of the elements on a page. Now let's say we're talking mostly about regular size screens. Of course, this is all going to be somewhat different on a really tiny screen. The text blocks themselves, no matter what the text actually says, the headings, the size of the headings, the colors, the images, the size of the images, etc., their placement, exactly how they align. All of those things can say something about how people will react, what they think they're seeing there, how easy it is to understand what the overall ideas are on the page. Even if, watch this. Can you tell me from the left page to the right page which are the most important things? Which of those two shows better? The right one. You see? Right. What is it doing? I'll go over that next time. But what are some of the things it's doing? I'm sorry?
Format is good.
Yeah. Right, but specifically, what is it doing? That makes you say that.
The picture, then the image, then the title, and then the paragraph.
Okay, so there's some concept that there's no text here, so you don't know what the heck it's saying. But would you say that this is a chunk? That's a chunk? That's a chunk? Now you know that without even knowing what the heck it says. It says nothing, actually. Versus this, how could you? I mean, this might have something to do with each other. Maybe this. What else makes that easy to do? Okay, so here, there's a consistency. There's alignment. Yes, there's an alignment. Okay, there's also an alignment. Well, there's only one example of this, but you see the indent alignment. I'll tell you, there's actually a lot of stuff going on here. If you're a user interface designer, there's a term. You know how you have CRUD? You know what CRUD is about, right? Okay, from Dave. This one is called crap, which we'll get into, but it has to do with the A is for alignment, the R is for repetition, I know what the C is.
C is for contrast, right?
Contrast, thank you. And P is for
Proximity.
Proximity. Oh, you've studied this before. Proximity, yes. All of those things are actually at play here, okay? The fact that repetition, this is the same size as this, is the same size as this is smaller, so somehow this is indicating, somehow these are indicating these are somehow similar, okay? Versus this one might be, well, it's sort of similar, but different, okay? The alignment, that's the, or the contrast, the darker here, this is bigger, darker, et cetera, et cetera. So there are many cues like that you should really know something about if you want to do a good job at this. So I guess we'll pick it up from there next time, but there's a lot more like that we can get into. Okay?